Hey again, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Discussions of Darkness. This week, I'd like to start off with a phrase often used by storytellers to inform players of the sort of predicaments they get themselves into. And that phrase, I'm sure we've all heard it, now say it with me: actions have consequences. And I've brought this up on the channel before in some of the older episodes where I've talked about running games, particularly in more varied parts of the world of darkness. But oftentimes when we say these words, or we say something akin to it, we only think of the negative repercussions of this. It's the equivalent of telling players, if you jump off of this cliff, it does not matter how high you roll, you cannot fly, and you will fall down to your death. But, as I've said before, consequences come in all sorts of flavors, from good to neutral to bad. And it is important that as storytellers, we recognize that consequences should also be organic when it comes to the games that we're running. As an example of what I'm talking about, and as I've done several times on the show before, let's take a step out of the world of darkness for a moment and move over to a game that I'm sure most of us are also familiar with, which has a very different style and take. As I'm sure many players watching this, and many storytellers watching this as well, have probably sat at a Dungeons & Dragons table at some point in time. It is very rare that someone into our hobby has not at least played that big flagship game at least once. And as anyone who has played a Dungeons & Dragons game can tell you, particularly if you have run a pre-written module or a pre-written campaign, things can get a little linear from time to time in these games. And part of that is because so many fantasy RPGs, fantasy modules, fantasy stories take place in isolated environments, or they are just not connected to the greater world around them. As an example, take the very easy quest that most of us have probably done at some point in time of you're in a small town, either on the frontier or as distant from everywhere else, and there is some variety of threat. There are orc brigands messing with people on the road, there's a goblin horde who's coming to town and stealing your stuff, there are random undead that are just arising in the area. And you, as the hardy adventurers, are the ones who have to go out and deal with this problem. Simple enough. These things are written for high adventure, they're written for a certain type of story, and they expect you and your plucky companions to go out and fight the monsters and get the treasure, get your levels and experience points, and move on to the next part of the game. However, the World of Darkness and the Chronicles of Darkness are rarely isolated in the setting. Things are rarely disconnected at such a level that your actions can have relatively few consequences. Or, if you go with that example, let's say you do go into the goblin caves, and you kill all the goblins, and you destroy their power structure, and you take back all the things that they stole, and you give it back to the citizens they were taken from. That's as far as that plot goes. There are rarely repercussions for the things that you did, particularly early on in the game. These are meant as small adventures, ways for you to test out your powers, to figure out how you work together as a party, and just to give you an easier victory. In the World of Darkness, you're often in urban environments, and if you're not in densely packed areas where one small act of violence, one small act of disrespect can have ripples sent through the ecosystem, you are usually part of bigger organizations, part of bigger causes, whether you're part of a changeling court in Lost, or you're part of the Camarilla in Vampire. There are forces above, around, and even below you that are all moving and shifting and working together. And any time players do something, whether it's good or bad, there should be repercussions. And, as I mentioned earlier, those repercussions should feel organic. They should feel like the setting responding naturally to what players have chosen to do. As an example, let's take a similar low-level problem that most supernatural creatures could easily deal with. Let's say you and your coterie, your branded throng, your motley, whatever it is for your particular game. You have been tasked with dealing with a street gang that is encroaching on the turf that your group owns. how you handle this could have repercussions going down the line. As an example, if you are primarily a social character or a group of social characters, you might find some way to engage with this particular gang. You might find what it is they want, what it is they're hoping to achieve. Do they want money? Do they want power? Do they want credibility? Are they hoping to boost their recruitment numbers, to take more turf, to grow themselves as a syndicate? Is that something you want to help with? Do you want to make this threat into your friend? And if you do that, what problems or solutions is that going to provide in the future? For example, if negotiations go poorly, it's very likely you have a bunch of hoods who draw on you and they have no idea what it is you are. And depending on what kind of supernatural creature you've chosen to play, that could be a minor inconvenience or a deadly threat. If things go well, you now have a group of contacts, a group of allies that you can work with, that can help you manage things going forward, which can be particularly useful if you happen to, well, not be the most physically capable character and you need backup. Or if you are a physically capable character and you need one of those underworld contacts to get you occasional weapons that you are not supposed to have on civilian streets. But at the same time, even if there is a long-term positive thing from getting this gang on your side, getting them to work with you, getting them to, well, be part of your solution rather than a problem you have to deal with, that doesn't end the plot. They are now connected to you, and the ecosystem you're in keeps turning. If you make enemies down the line, those enemies could now target the gang as your allies. This could strip you of allies if they end up dying, or if they view your lack of help as betraying them. It could also mean that other problems that they bring upon themselves are now your problem. If they, for example, get targeted by the DEA or a big federal agency rather than just local cops that you could deal with or which you perhaps own, now you have to make a decision as to what do you do to get them out of trouble. How much of yourself are you willing to risk in order to assist your allies? And that's just one example that sort of shows you how quickly the world moves. Because no matter what you do, good, bad, or otherwise, things are going to keep moving, and you have to stay on top of those actions. And it could be all sorts of examples from the very big to the very small. As another example, let's say that there's currently chaos in the city and you're playing a vampire game. There's an argument over who is the rightful prince of this city, and people have to pick sides. What do? Do you throw your weight behind the candidate you think will be best? Or do you choose a candidate that you think will be a weak prince so that you can manipulate them better? Do you pick a third candidate that you're pretty sure isn't going to win, but the people won't blame you for backing? Do you do your best to stay out of it, hoping to just come in at the last moment and avoid punishment? And what repercussions does that have for your reputation? What repercussions does it have for your sire, your allies, your standing in the city? All of these things, these are just the day-to-day issues that you're going to have to face as part of the world of darkness. And this is something that, as a storyteller, you should really keep in mind as you're going, and you should keep track of what it is your players are doing and what methods they're using to solve problems. I mentioned this in a much earlier video. You should always have at least 3 solutions to solve any given plot or problem you put in front of your players: the social, the physical, and the mental. That way, no matter how a character is focused, there's always something they can do to help. And while I stand by that advice, it is also important to remember that, well, actions, depending on who takes them and in what order, can have unintended consequences as well. So when you, as a storyteller, are plotting what you want to do with your game, you're figuring out how you want to get your players pointed toward the goal. Tell them what you want them to accomplish, but don't focus on how. This is a piece of information I will tell any storyteller out there of. As soon as you start getting caught up in the how and telling yourself, well, they have to have these skills and they have to make these checks and they have to talk to this NPC, That's when you start putting things on rails and you start taking decisions and creativity out of the hands of your players. More importantly, though, it can make things feel less organic. It can make your game feel like it's really scripted, and players pick up on that very easily. So if you inform your players what they need to do, and you just show them the sandbox of options, it is entirely possible they will freeze and get decision paralysis. I will talk about that in a later video where I tell a story about one of my more interesting times as a storyteller, but generally speaking, it is a better idea to give your players more rather than to give them less and try to control how they go about things. So if you give your players the task of handle this problem, deal with this threat, whatever it is, watch what they do and keep track of those actions, who they've offended and who they've helped. Because a lot of the time you will find players feel rewarded when their actions have consequences, and when those consequences make sense based on what they've done. Because while you might not like being dragged in front of, the particular seasonal monarch that you have offended in Changeling, knowing that you are not there because it's a pre-written plot point and that's just how things have to go, but because of the actions you took and what you chose to do, adds drama to the scene. It makes it more personal. It lets them know that this world is reacting to them, and that is a thing that players very much, react to. They like that. They like knowing that they're not just playing through a bunch of pre-written scenes before they get to whatever the next cutscene is, so they can just stand there in the background and watch plot unfold in front of them. They are making this story, and you, as the storyteller, are the one who is handling the physics of the world. You're the one who determines whether or not they have mistreated allies, or whether or not certain people have gained respect for them, if they feel they've been acting honorably and show up to help them in their time of need, or if they start plotting against them because the players have proven themselves to be a threat. So, when you are sitting down to make a game, and the more complicated the game you are running, the more important this is. Don't just create a path that you expect your players to take and detail that path as if they're on a roller coaster. Come up with the environment, the ecosystem, all the parts of it, and let them wander about freely in the enclosure, see what they do, see what actions they take, because those are the things that they're going to react to going forward. And this does mean, as a storyteller, you will probably have reams of NPCs that never show up on the map. You will have entire plot points that are never found. You will have locations the players probably never go to, or only go to once and never return to again. Those are, unfortunately, the collateral you have to deal with as a storyteller, because you're not a novelist. You're not writing the story all on your own for the enjoyment of an audience. You are helping facilitate people tell their stories. So you don't really have control over the main characters of this narrative you're spinning. As such, don't bother. Just sit back and observe them. Give yourself a bit of a Jane Goodall moment of ask yourself, what are they doing? Follow them, take notes. Remind them of the people they have helped, the people they've wronged, the things that they have done right, the things that they have really messed up. And make sure that neither of those are forgotten by the setting at large. If they help somebody now, that same somebody might come back later with a critical piece of information, or willing to provide them a resource, or something really helpful like an alibi for a crime that they very definitely committed, but there's not quite enough evidence. On the other hand, if they wrong somebody, if they leave witnesses behind after a random act of violence, if they don't finish off a job, and that job gets, word to hunters who are wondering who's causing all these problems, or if they have rivals that are looking to get something over them. All of these things are moving parts in the watch. And you don't have to use all of them, but it's better to have something and not need it than to need it and not have it. So that is my advice for storytellers this week of be observant when your players take actions, and while you should definitely have as much of the world fleshed out and filled out as possible, Let your players wander, let them take actions, let them do things. If you feel they deserve a warning, informing them that taking this action will definitely have a very bad consequence, do that. Let them act in full knowledge of what they are going to do and what risk they are taking, but don't stop them from taking those risks. And if they survive, make sure that good or bad, that pendulum comes swinging back their way again. Now, before I leave you all this week, I wanted to ask you, if you're a storyteller and you've had moments where players have run face first into the consequences of their actions, what are some of your most memorable stories of this happening? Tell us down in the comments. I'm very curious, and hopefully we can get a couple of storytellers out there and I can share some of my own stories from when I was sitting in the big chair and doing my very best to make things work. But I have a couple more topics for the future that should be coming up, so make sure you like and subscribe, and let me know if there's more stuff you would like covered from any corner of the world or Chronicles of Darkness. I've got a couple of fun announcements that hopefully the next time you see my face on this channel, I'll be able to tell you all about. But until then, this has been another episode of Discussions of Darkness, and happy gaming, everyone.
Thank you for staying to the end of this episode of Discussions of Darkness. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking the video and sharing it on your own social media to help boost the signal. And if you'd like to help us keep the show and channel going, don't forget to hit that subscribe button as well. If you have any questions about the topic I covered today, or if you have something you'd like to see covered in a future episode, make sure to leave it in the comments below. Lastly, please check out the link in the video description to browse all of my World and Chronicles of Darkness supplements from Ezekiel Games. So far, we've covered Changeling the Lost, Vampire the Masquerade, Mage the Awakening, and Geist the Sin Eaters, in addition to a handful of general supplements that will be useful for any game set in the World or Chronicles of Darkness settings. Thank you in advance for your support. You're the ones who help us keep the lights on, so we don't fade into the shadows.